It is January the 18th, 2010. We are at the home of Mrs. Clara Kehoe, Cleland, born May 24th, 1927, in Bealton, Virginia. Mrs. Cleland served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War as a first lieutenant in the nursing corps. She also served in Japan after the war, as well as at Fort Benning, Georgia. She ended her career as a first lieutenant. Conducting the interview are Christopher Bryans, teacher at Community Christian School, along with Mrs. Kehoe's husband, Major General United States Army retired John Cleland, along with Alexis Carson and Courtney Barnard, students at Community Christian School. So Mrs. Cleland, tell us something about your career.
After finishing high school in Bealton, Virginia, at the age of 16, I moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. There I lived with my sister and brother-in-law, and I attended the Corpus Christi Junior College. After 2 years there, I was accepted at the Duke University School of Nursing as a cadet nurse. The Nurse Corps was set up in 1943 to alleviate the dire shortage of nurses. We cadet nurses worked long hours in addition to our studies. We were furnished room, board, meals, books, uniform, and a small stipend. Now, there were 100, at the time, 80% of the nursing being done in our country was done by student nurses. And 164,000 nurses finished under that program. I was in the last class, which when war had really ended in 1945, but there was still a dire shortage of nurses. When I finished there at Duke and received my degree, the Bachelor of Science in Nursing, I stayed at Duke for a short while, and then I later decided I would join the Army Nurse Corps. I was sent to the basic officers course at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And from there I was transferred to Walter Reed. And we were all supposed to have a year in the general hospital before we went to another hospital. However, come June 1950, that changed. We were needed for the Korean War. On the 21st of July 1950, I received a call from the chief nurse there at Walter Reed. I was told to prepare to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, to join the 1st Mobile Army Surgical Hospital for duty in Korea. Now, when my mother heard that, she was quite upset. You see, she had 4 of her children served in World War II. The 2 oldest sons were bomber pilots, and they were killed when their planes went down over France. Another son served in the Marine Corps as a Corsair pilot, and a sister was in the Army Nurse Corps. She was in North Africa and Italy and France. And she told me, now anytime you want to come home, you just let me know. I will write President Truman that on about the 26th of July of 50, another nurse from Walter Reed and I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and we met many other nurses and doctors there to prepare to go to Korea. We were given all our combat gear to go into combat, and all the sleeping bags, some people, the men call barracks bag, we had a lot too. Finally, we sailed from the port of Olympia, Washington, on the MSTS O'Hara, Now, we were supposed to go directly into Korea, but by the time we got to Yokohama, they changed their minds and said, we better stay in Yokohama and wait for the next men going to Korea. And in August, we left the Yokohama. We stayed there in Yokohama first and helped with the 155th Station Hospital. But later we went from Yokohama and on a Navy transport, the Man, and sailed into the harbor there at Incheon. And that harbor was filled with ships, large and small. And of course the battleship Missouri was there. That was very imposing. And from our ship, we had to climb down riggings to get into a smaller ship that took us ashore in Incheon. Once we got to Incheon, we went to an old building there that probably had been a schoolhouse. We don't know what it had been, but previously. Now, I was with the group that went that way. We all stayed there, but one group went to a POW camp to take care of the prisoners of war who had been injured there. And they worked very hard, especially the nurse anesthetists. Now, our patients at that old schoolhouse were the civilians who were injured at that landing. Now, the ones I remember most were the children. Some were burned, and they cried constantly, especially at night. There were no screens on the windows, so the flies came in, and there were maggots in their wounds. And those maggots did a pretty good job of debriding the wounds and on the burns and the amputees. But that didn't help those poor children to feel any better.
Now, you landed in Incheon in September 1950. Is that correct?
No, let's see. I have the date on that we landed there at Incheon. It was 10 days after that famous landing.
It was 10 days after the landing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was September.
Mm-hmm.
In September when we left the port to go there, and it was 10 days after the landing. That was probably about the 4th of October. No, it was about the 1st of October. Now, I hope that those children were sent to better hospitals once we left them there in Incheon. But on the 7th of October, we went into to a city near Seoul. From there, we joined the 7th Infantry Division and loaded there for security to make a trip down to Busan. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, the next morning, the first sergeant knocked on the ambulance where we were and told us to get out of the ambulance and sit on the ditches, which we did. And we sat there there were bullets flying back and forth and other things going on. But we sat there until daybreak. At daybreak, they brought the injured from the unit, the 7th Infantry Division headquarters, which was just in front of us. They brought their injured men back to us to take care of them. And we did as good a job as we could, since we didn't have any supplies there. And we took care of them as best we could. But we lost one who was the headquarters company commander. And once while we were sitting there, some soldiers came by at the last there, and they brought the other units in to take care of that pocket of North Koreans who were there and had been left there. And some soldiers came by and saw there were women there, nurses, so they said, "Don't worry, women, we'll get you out of here." They were probably 17, 18 years old. We liked their spirit there. We finally left about late afternoon and made the trip on go on to Pusan. We did leave some badly injured by the hospital there in Tegu, and the rest of us went on to Pusan. And we were headquartered out in an old building near the racetrack in Pusan. And we stayed there a few days and finally went aboard the ship, the Patrick, the MSTS Patrick. But we could not leave to go to North Korea yet because the harbor at Wonsan had been mined, and they had to remove the mining before they could get there. Well, one good thing while we were there in Pusan, we got to go off the ship and see the Bob Hope show. It didn't take long for Bob Hope to get over to Korea once the war started. It was almost unreal to see that show there in the midst of everything going on.
So was that when Bob Hope was there? He usually did these Christmas shows, but that was certainly much earlier than Christmas.
Yes, that was October.
That was in October.
Right, but he wanted to get there in the first to cheer everybody up.
Do you remember who he brought with him? What do you remember about the show?
Oh yes, there was now which sisters were there? Those people. I've got it here. Which ones were?
Well, let's see. The Andrews sisters.
I think yes, it was the Andrews sisters.
The Andrews
and
sisters.
That other comedian who was with him, Jerry Colonna. He was one there. I'm sure they never put on a better show there. Yeah, they definitely, the Andrews sisters were there. Finally, on the 28th of October, we did sail for Ewon in North Korea. And we landed about the 4th of November we were anchored out and we were brought by LCMs into Ewon. And we spent the night there in Ewon in some old buildings, and I didn't unpack all of my sleeping gear. I had a cold night that night. I knew afterwards that we were in a cold place, so I'd better unpack everything. But the next day after that, we went up to Pukchon to support the regiment on the Yalu River. And in Pukchon, we operated the way a MASH hospital, a MASH was supposed to operate. We had 60 beds. We took care of the patients got them immediately stabilized, and then they were sent back to field or evacuation hospital. And we had some interesting times there in Pukchon. We did have Thanksgiving there, and that was one of the best meals I ever had in Korea. They tried to get all they could there. Once while we were we had a writer from the Saturday Evening Post come visit. She stayed overnighting now with the nurses in this old Japanese schoolhouse there. A Japanese-built schoolhouse, I should say. They were, of course, taught Japanese and the rest. This writer was Nora Wong. She had been in China, and she had written a great deal about the Chinese, and she was doing the Korean, and she predicted that the Chinese would come across the border, and they did very shortly. Now, living in Korea was, and working there was certainly different from anything I'd done before. They usually the old schoolhouses are tents. The last place I lived was a tent, and we wore fatigues and boots or any in-tight boots that we could get to fit us. It was hard for me to really find some that would fit me. They had what they called shoe packs that were good in the snow, and I put lots of socks on and wore those. And we slept in sleeping bags, those mountain-style sleeping bags. And we had mess kits. The drinking cup, canteen, and drinking cups, which we kept with us, because that's the first place I drank coffee. They'd have some coffee ready at all times. So in the middle of the night, sometimes I'd have some coffee.
So those are those metal drinking cups that actually fit underneath the canteen that you slipped off and unbuckled the handle there. And
yeah, we unbuckled the handle and took it to dinner. And we have a picture of the way we ate there. We'd take our canteen, go get our meal from large serving dishes, and after we finished eating, we took our eating gear and dumped all the extra food off. We dipped it into hot soapy water, and then we dipped it into plain soapy water to rinse off the soap. And that was the way that operated.
What did you think of the food? What was typical?
Typical. Well, at first we had, if we were traveling and hadn't set up the mess hall, we had some sea rations. But when the mess hall was set up, we had we had some Spam, and we had other, and they did get some eggs over there. So sometimes they had good pancakes for breakfast.
Real eggs, not the powdered eggs?
I think they got some eggs, and I think probably they had powdered eggs for the. They had some way to get some, but they made some of the best were the pancakes at breakfast. So I usually ate breakfast. That was one of the best meals of the day. The rest might be Spam or the B rations, they call them. That was beef and gravy, pork and gravy, and they
all out of cans, right?
Yeah, they had the big cans of them that they served on, and they did well with what they had, and it was not too bad.
Since we had so many rations left over from the Second World War, did you find yourself eating sea rations that were 5+
They
years
probably
old?
were.
Mm-hmm. Over 5 years old?
They've been. And the cans of, I remember one of the nurses didn't want to ever see fruit cocktail again. Some people say they like that, but she'd had enough of fruit cocktail in World War II. But they did very well with them. And we had canned fruits and vegetables, and they made some sort of nondescript bread, and it was all adequate there. Of course, sometimes we got packages from home, and of course our patients slept on these cots too, so it was difficult to take care of them because they had to bend down to take care of them. But we did the best we could there. I think now in the receiving tent, they built some things over them so that they would be easy to take care of when they first came in. Although if we had a lot of patients, they were on cots too.
And cots only were about, what, 2.5 feet off the ground?
Just about that. Mm-hmm. And once while we were in Pakchong, they said to get ready because General Allman was coming. to inspect the hospital. So, of course, everybody's rushing around, and we get everything set, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, vehicle pulls up at the front of the hospital, and out walks not General Lawman, but Joe DiMaggio and Lefty O'Doul.
Joe DiMaggio?
Right, Joe DiMaggio. And they came and visited with the patients. And so it was a great morale booster to see him.
Did you get a chance to actually talk to him?
Yes, not very long. He was busy.
Well, what were they like? What were Joe DiMaggio and Lefty like?
They were very friendly with the patients, and the patients were just awestruck, I think, to see him there. But they were both very interested and very interesting. So we took advantage of any morale booster there, and it was very good. But it was soon after that the Chinese came across the border, and it was pretty iffy. I had to be escorted to the latrine at times. They were afraid to let us very far out of the immediate area. But after a while, it was, I think it was the 3rd of December, they decided we better leave Pakchong. So no, it was before that. I guess before that, because by the 5th we were down another. But they got some pretty good breakfast, and no time to pack any lunch, but we left on any vehicles. All the personnel just went in any vehicles that would move, and we left. And that evening we went to Ham Hung, and the 121st Evacuation Hospital was there, and they were filled with patients coming from the Chosin Reservoir. And we helped them for a short while, but by the 5th of December, we set up our own hospital. The first MASH is out at Hung Nam, and we were in an old building there. Now it was right there where we saw the harbor, and the ships that were in the harbor, and the battleship Missouri was there, and when those guns were fired from the Missouri, it would really shake the place. They had taped the windows so that they wouldn't break as the guns were firing around us. And we took care of Army, Marines, or any soldiers, and then we had at least one Korean we were treating there. And we were taking care of them so they could either go back to duty or go back to their unit or be evacuated. And finally it was the 15th of December, they decided we nurses should go out on an MSTS ship in the harbor, the Ainsworth. The 121st Evacuation Hospital had set it up as a hospital, and we went out and helped them take care of the soldiers, the wounded. And we got lots of fireworks. We saw lots of fireworks with all the ships firing off into Korea. And especially a large number of them on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Day, we left for Busan. We had a Christmas dinner aboard ship, and the next day we were in Busan. We took our patients were taken aboard other ships or sent back to their unit there in Busan, and we nursed some people had come ahead and set up a hospital there, and we moved up to Gyeongju. There we started operating it differently. There we started taking any patients who needed immediate care. We had lots with upper respiratory infections and other ailments. So we were no longer just the surgical hospital. And we stayed there in Kehoe and for a while. Then we were sent, about the 13th, we went on to the city of Andong. And it was, first we were outside the city, and they decided it wasn't secure enough, so we moved into the city of Andong. And we, from there we went on to Chichon. That was about the middle of February. And there in Chichon, our operating room was set up in an old bank vault. Our patients were in tents, and we were living in tents this time. One thing that at Chichon, we had a visit from Grandpa Jones.
Grandpa Jones.
Then they set us up in a field practically, and we nurses anyway stood around to see the show. But I was pleased to see about 1960. I read in the Army Times that his daughter had been told what the Grandpa Jones troop had done, and she decided she'd join the Army Nurse Corps.
Now, this is the same Grandpa Jones that years later would be on the television show Hee-Haw.
Right, same one.
Same one for the Grand Ole Opry.
Yes, yeah, he brought his whole troop. The women stayed in the tents with the nurses. Yes. And one of the patients I saw there in Chichon, with both his arms badly shot up, I would see later when I got back to Walter Reed. Now in April, I received orders to go to Japan. I was there in Kyoto, Japan. It was an old capital city and a very interesting city in Japan. And we had a rough trip going from Korea to Japan, though. We were on two of the other nurses and I were on a Greek Air Force plane. And that went from Chichon to Daegu to get on the C-54. That was one of the roughest flights I've ever been on, but the Air Force C-54 was a nice flight over to Tokyo. Now in September, I received orders to go back to the USA. And after leave, I was stationed at Walter Reed again. I was on Ward 1A, and one of the patients there was Captain John Cleland. And I got to see more of him. Now, come 1st of March, we were married there at Walter Reed Chapel. And he makes sure the pictures, when I have a talk, he gets a picture of our wedding in there.
So this was the same captain that you treated there with his arms all shot up?
Right. Mm-hmm. That's the same one.
So what brought that relationship about? Did you treated him, he remembered you, you got back to Walter Reed, did you keep in contact with? Is that how you knew each other?
Well, he was a patient there at Walter Reed.
He was a patient there as well.
On the same ward where I worked.
Still recovering from his wounds? Still
recovering. He was in the hospital a year after that. So it took that long. He would have one operation. He had to recover from that operation, have another one, and then another. So the cycles went along like that. In fact, when I first got to Walter Reed, he was off on a trip, so I didn't see him until the last of October or the 1st of November when he appeared back on the ward.
So did he recognize you first, or did you recognize him?
I recognized him first, I think. I don't think he was in such... he says he remembers me from there, but I don't know. But I well remember his name, because I'd seen the name. And there's preacher to the university, Duke University, was James Cleland. He pronounced it Cleland because he came to Duke's directly from Scotland. And since we were married, I've lived in 7 different states, I think, and 2 foreign countries, Germany and Thailand. And I have 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren.
Did any of them follow in your
3
footsteps?
sons were in the Army at one time. One was an Army physician, and one was an Army engineer, and one was Army infantry, and they each spent about 9 years in the Army. And then after Gary got out, the infantryman, he joined the reserves, and he retired just a few years ago from the reserves. He had duty in Afghanistan.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Cleland. I'd like to ask you some other questions relating to your career. First, you had mentioned that you had lost 2 brothers in World War II.
Yes, I did.
Who were bomber pilots.
Right.
You had mentioned that they were shot down and killed over France.
Right.
And yet, you decided to make to join the Army and to become a member of the Army Nursing Corps, despite the impact that had on
yes.
you. What is it that most influenced your decision to go into the Army rather than to join say a local hospital, become part of a local hospital?
I thought it would be interesting, and maybe I do some good for my country too after my brothers had given their lives.
And why did you join? Why did you choose the Army rather than say the Air Force?
I'd heard more about the Army. Also,
or the Navy.
I like terra firma. I don't want that motion sickness. I have a weakness there. Yet, here join the Army and travel a great deal on ships, planes, and the rest.
Well, tell us a little
I
bit.
also had my sister was in the Army Nurse School.
Before you were?
Oh, yes. She was in World War II in North Africa, and Italy and France. She spent 3 years overseas and 27 years altogether in the Army Nurse School.
So that was certainly an influence for you.
Right, I'd heard about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us about your most memorable experiences, your initial experiences in the Army, the initial training that you had before you shipped out to Japan and then following that Korea.
When I first joined the Army and was at the Medical Field Service School in Texas, very good training. They were well organized there, and it was very good training.
What did that training include?
No firearms.
No firearms.
Now, I understand my daughter-in-law was Army Nurse Corps. She was taught it, but I was not. And they covered things well for the Army. And then at Walter Reed, I had
Map reading.
Oh, yes, I had map reading there.
Map reading?
Right, and map reading.
Customs and courtesies?
Customs and courtesy.
Teach you how to march?
Yes. The nurses marched in their white uniforms out on a parade ground there near Old Barracks at Fort Sam Houston. You can see all those nurses out there marching in white uniforms.
Did any of them had any difficulties learning how to march?
No, I
you
don't
recall?
think so.
No,
I don't think so. And we were also taught the chain of command in the medical system, and how they brought the wounded from the unit field hospital evac and then back to the general hospital, and ours the biggest hospital in one area, and then they were evacuated by plane or ship.
Tell us about what a typical, before at least the invasion by the Chinese in late 1950, what your typical duties would have been in Korea.
There I was working on the wards. We would get our patients. Some we had varied patients. One had been shot in his chest, and he had been flown over to the hospital. And I saw him a few years ago. And one had had something fall on his chest. There were injuries like that, and they had to pull his chest out. But mostly were the ones who did have some gunshot wounds or something there, and sometimes broken bones. Mostly they were in the cast. And we as in a general hospital, they had to be bathed if they were not able to do it alone there at the MASH, and be taken care of there. We had usually had two corpsmen along with these two nurses on the ward. There I was with the ward where they had been operated and sent for care later. And later I went to the receiving ward, and they had to have care before the surgery. And of course we had a small lab there and a small x-ray department. Nearly always they had to have wet readings, they called them in those days. It's very different these days, but they had to have an immediate x-ray before they'd start so we had what practically what was a miniature of what is going on at bigger hospitals.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned is early after the landing in Incheon and then up there in Iwan, that you lacked supplies, a lot of medical supplies.
They were pretty good surprise, and we had the blood. Because sometimes we pump it in. When we did not have supplies was on that ambush, because we were just to go by convoy down to Pusan. We weren't really prepared that. We had some old supplies which didn't work very well.
So how did you handle that? How did you adjust?
They did find some
supplies?
Blood plasma in somewhere in their supplies that were coming, and it had been left over from World War II, though. And they got some of that going, but we bandaged them, tried to stop any bleeding. And, of course, the one man who was the worst one, the rest of them got immediate care. And we talked to all of them as they came in to see what we could do and give them more support and morale there.
About how many hours a day were you performing your duties?
Usually about 12 hours.
Were there
sometimes more. Sometimes at the last they said they could give us a few hours less than that, so they'd give us a few hours. But that, if anything happened though, we were right in there.
What is the longest stretch of time, longest shift that you recall having worked?
Probably 16 hours, I expect.
Was it difficult? Was the level of stress difficult for all of the nurses? Were there some that perhaps broke under the strain?
No, I don't think so. We were so busy and thinking about what to do, we didn't have that much to think about there. What's that?
Well, this was certainly a question I was going to ask anyway, but thank you, General. Well, there were, of course, after the war, there was, as I recall, there was even a movie before the MASH series had come out. There was a movie in the early 50s that tried to portray the MASH, and of course, then there was the series MASH that had been on. So, was there any resemblance to either the movie, the 1970 movie, or then later on the very famous TV series? Is there anything that looked familiar to you?
Well, the tents, the everything was barren when I was there. There weren't those trees. And in that movie, they do show that there are trees around and there's forestation and things were green and pretty there, but not then. It was sort of barren. And the only resemblance I can see, except for the tents, was a lot of patients coming in all at one time. That the degree of the number of patients. Now we didn't have showers. We nursed all the personnel that didn't have any showers. We had to bathe from our helmets, and wash our clothes. There are some pictures that have been shown of the nurses washing their clothes out of their helmets and hanging them to dry. I have a picture here somewhere of this is one of them. And the old stoves there. And we usually put a can of water on there to get a little more, made the air very dry, so we put another can on there.
Hold that photograph right up in front of you there. I wanna zero in on it here. Yeah. All right. Now, are you in one of those photographs?
Yes, I'm
are you
in the
this
back,
photograph
about
here?
the middle and the back
Yeah.
there.
If you could point yourself out there as I'm showing this.
Okay.
That way I can identify you. That's you there, huh?
That is I there, right.
Focus right in on it. Oh, there you were. So what you're saying then, Mrs. Cleland, is that the kinds of shenanigans and the pranks and unprofessionalism in the series really had nothing to do with how a MASH really worked.
No, it did not. And they had showers and they had an officers club. We didn't have that. And what it probably was some special tent that they had there, and that's about it.
Well, other than say the Bob Hope show that you caught down further south, what did you all do for fun and relaxation right there when you were off duty, wherever you were?
And we could read. There's one picture of me here reading while one of the other nurses are washing her clothes. We had the Stars and Stripes.
Is that picture there?
This is the mess line here.
So there you all are, all lined up, and where are you in one of these?
Yes. Let's see where I am. I'm right here.
Okay.
The good-looking one.
Oh, I'll say.
There's another good-looking one in there. I think she's deceased now.
Now I've noticed that in the photograph there are there's a black person in the photograph as well. Now I know that this was a couple of years after President Truman had integrated the armed forces.
We had an ambulance company set up right next to our hospital, and he's from the ambulance company. They were set up right next door. All the drivers, all the men there were black. They had white officers, commissioned officers, but their NCOs were very good, and
So was a mess hall.
And they had their own mess hall. We'd go eat with them sometimes. They'd do something a little different with Spam or hash or something, and that made it more interesting. And they were very conscientious, taking those. They were the ones who took our patients from the hospital to the airfield or the train. There was a train that came from Busan up to Chichon. And when there was a nurse aboard the train, and she would come stay with us overnight until the train went back to Pusan. And now we did every once in a while get to a shower point. It was the quartermaster corps had set up different ones, but the rest of the time we'd better bathe in a helmet there. And
So how often did you get a chance to go to the shower points? Once a month, once every couple months?
Every week or two usually.
Was it how did the women respond to constantly having to bathe out of their helmet rather than being able to shower, something so far removed from typical American life?
That's what we had to do, so we did it. If you wanted to be clean, you better do it.
Were you able to stay in a regular touch with your family back in the States?
Yes, they were pretty good mail service, except after we left North Korea, and about the 15th of December, we left there and went aboard. We didn't get much mail there in Hungnam, and then we were aboard ship, so we didn't get mail until we got back down to South Korea. And we found out that it was great. It was great to get even packages from home because it was Christmas time.
Well, do you recall any particular humorous events that happened? Maybe pranks that were pulled? Anything that you recall with a kind of a humorous touch to it?
Wasn't anything funny about it.
I don't think there was anything funny about it, but we had great rapport with the different people, so we'd talk to them to try to cheer everybody up. Some of the doctors had to leave for different reasons, and one of the nurses left in North Korea to go to because she was having ear trouble, so she didn't make it back to South Korea, but she went over to Tokyo.
Did some of the nurses find it perhaps more difficult than other nurses when they lost a patient?
I don't think so. Not while we were there. You know, I was the youngest one there. I was 22 to 23 years old, and some of those nurses were over 40. Some were in their 20s and some beginning 30s.
What was the rapport and the teamwork among the nurses, despite the age gaps?
We had good rapport.
Lucky 13.
Yeah, the Lucky 13. We were named the Lucky 13. We were known as that after that ambush.
Tell us about how did you get the name, the Lucky 13?
Well, we just decided there were 13 nurses, and we were lucky to be there because we weren't far from where that convoy was hit. If we'd been a little further around the curve of the mountain, we would have been hit.
So that was probably the most harrowing, the most dangerous incident that you recall during your time there in
Yes,
Korea?
maybe we were in worse trouble up in North Korea before we came out, but they didn't tell us.
To this day, they haven't told you.
No. I can imagine after all the books that have been written about it.
Well, you had mentioned some other former patients that you had seen or gotten to know after the war. How many of these relationships have you continued, and how have you managed to maintain contact with some of them?
Well, it just happened that I remembered that name, and I remembered him, and I had met him before in 2 different stations. And I had some of the wives, after I got to Fort Benning, I had some of the wives of these men who were in that ambulance company. I had some of the wives as patients there at Fort Benning. Now, I saw them there at Fort Benning, and let's see, there was a dentist who came over on the ship with us. I saw him again at Fort Jackson. It just happened to be that that's some place where I was. They were stationed.
Bosmer.
And some of the nurses. They were in Germany when we were there. Let's see, 3 of them were in Germany. 3 or 4 of them were stationed in Germany when I was stationed in Germany. And then years later, when John was on the board of the Military Officers Association of America, or TROA, one of the nurses was on the board also.
You had mentioned some of the winters that you had to endure, the winter that you had to endure there in Korea. Were the winters considerably colder than that which you had grown up in and been
I think so, in Virginia. A little colder, much colder than Virginia. I just packed on clothing.
Did you ever find out how cold it got during that winter there, that 1950, 1951?
The Han River froze over.
So that was certainly below zero.
Well below zero, I believe.
Zero. Well, is there anything, Mrs. Cleland, that you would like to add to our interview that you haven't already discussed?
These 2 young ladies would like to be nurses. What would you tell them? Army nurses.
I'll tell them what I and my sister say. It's one of the most rewarding experiences. And if you join the Army Nurse Corps, you're going to see the world, because she has been stationed Europe and in the U.S. from West Point, New York to Seattle, Washington. She served as chief nurse at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Fort Eustis, Virginia, and she was chief nurse for the 8th Army in Korea. So it'll be an experience that you won't find many other places.
Well, this is a question that I also intend to ask General Cleland tomorrow. But do you believe there has been enough attention? Korea, the war in Korea has been sometimes known by historians as the forgotten war. Do you believe that there has been enough attention paid to the sacrifices that American men and women actually endured in that conflict?
Yeah, there could be more attention, because they were certainly a great many, and they sort of, I'm afraid the historians seem to push it aside. Or maybe not historians, but the media and the rest. Maybe they wouldn't even remember if it weren't for that MASH TV and movie.
Well, may we never forget. Thank you again, Mrs. Cleland.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this photograph, Mrs. Cleland.
Well, I think this is the first place where we were. No, I'm trying to think where it was too. I can't remember for sure. And this is, I'm the one kneeling down to see the cot, to see the patient. And the one standing is Lieutenant Jensen. And this was when they first started coming in on that.
So this is on one of the cots that you had, and you had to bend down very, very low, unlike a hospital bed.
Right. There I was kneeling down instead of bending down, which it was either one way or the other.
Were you required to also know how to actually erect and to tear down all of those tents?
Usually we had enough men there. What we had, our job was to pack the supplies.
And you had to be able to leave, I understand, within 6 hours of notification. You had to be packed up, ready to go? Is that true?
Now, we were supposed to be. Luckily, we didn't. Even when we left North Korea, we had a little more notice than that to get our we did have to get the last patients out that morning, and then we left that day, so we wasn't too much more than that. But we managed it there.
Now that building, that picture of that building that you were looking at a couple of minutes ago, the one that I had given you, Tell us a little bit about that picture as
Later,
well as this.
we were
this next
told
one.
when we were there that this was part of a veterinary school where they taught veterinarians. They did have other places out near there, and where they kept the animals, I expect. But it was a school there in Pakchang to teach veterinary medicine. That's what we were told later on.
That was South Korea.
Now
North
this one is
Korea.
in North Korea.
That's in North Korea.
That's in Pakchang.
I see.
It's bigger than most of we stayed in other places because
Yes.
this was a big graduate school, evidently, under their auspices.
Is that the condition that it was in when you were there?
Yes, it was, just about.
Looks like all the windows are blown out.
Yeah, we had to do something about we had to replace. They replaced some of them and boarded up some of them.
And what do you recall when that was? Was it also during winter?
Winter had just started. We were there in November, and it was cold.
So it was cold inside and outside.
Right.
Freezing cold. Now there's another picture there that's very meaningful to you, I see.
Yes.
Yes. Now
I've
there's
got
one I'd
this
like
out.
to see.
This is the chapel at Walter Reed.
Now, boy, do I have a close-up of you, too. Very nice. You got your eyes closed there.
Oh, I did?
Yes, it looks like it. And the traditional swords there aloft there
Yes.
for, yes,
There.
for your wedding.
One man there later was a resident here.
Uh-huh.
His widow still lives here.
This widow still lives here.
Right.
Wow. Well.
They were married.